All right, well, it's 2 o'clock, and thank you for joining us for the OAuth 2 webinar that's going to be hosted. It's hosted by us, but Wayne Golding, one of our MVPs, is going to be running the show here. If you have any questions, just type them in the QA section. That you should see a button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them as we go. Some we may answer during the webinar, some we may answer at the end in a Q&A session, but type them in there, and then we'll take it from there. So I'm going to turn it over to Wayne. I'm going to be watching your questions, and I'll ask them of Wayne at the appropriate time. So Wayne, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody. It's 8 o'clock in New Zealand at the moment on Thursday, so let's get into it. What I wanted to do today is my screen sharing. Better do that, I suppose, eh?
Yeah.
Yep. And I might get rid of that.
And why don't you turn on your camera? We don't see you.
I tried turning on my camera. Let's try it again. No, the host has stopped it. You'll have to turn yours on. Turn it on for me.
Oh, okay.
Or allow me to turn it on.
1 second. Huh, I don't see. Okay, I don't see how to do that. So let's just go on without the camera.
Okay. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about how I connect to Xero using OAuth 2 and the proof key for code exchange workflow. And the reason for this is that most of my applications are desktop applications, and I can't embed the client secret for my Xero application within the code because it can be reverse engineered. Okay, so if you look on your screen, these two parts here, the Xero resource owner and the identity service part, are all just standard OAuth 2. Below that in this black box is Xero specific. Okay, so right, let me have a look at my little list here. Okay, the first thing we need to do is to create our application in Xero. And to do that, I need to log in. Box in the way. And 2FA to connect. Okay, so I don't have any applications at the moment, so we'll create a new one. It needs to have a name, obviously. Xojo demo looks like a good one. And we're doing the PKCE app. We need a company URL and we need a redirect URI. That redirect URI is very important that it has to be that, at least for Xero. So basically, we're calling the local host means that it's not going to redirect the user anywhere useful. And we agree to it, and the app is created. We can fill in these extra fields if we want to, but that's not pertinent for today. So what we need to do is go to our configuration. And this is the client ID here that Xero has given our client. By client, we're talking about our client application, the consumer of the API. So I'll just copy that. And we'll get on to the next part, which is the authorization request. And in here, we need to build some stuff. So first of all, we need to copy that code in. We've got a state here. State is useful to, it gets returned to us so we can confirm that we haven't been hijacked on the way through. The redirect URI that we specified. And then we've got the scopes. And these scopes are allow us access to different parts of the API. And we can have a look over here and we can see these scopes in the documentation. So I'm getting the open ID for the user, which gives me user information, and I'm selecting a few of these accounting API scopes. That basically gives us granularity to what we can access. Okay, the next thing we need to do is generate a code verifier.
And just to be clear, Wayne, this is an application you wrote in Xojo specifically
Correct.
to demonstrate the bits and pieces of OAuth.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And we'll be looking at the code after the demonstration part of us is done in a bit more depth. Okay, so the code verifier is used so that we can prove that we are the person who sent or this is the application that sent the user off to authorize our app. Okay, and you can see from that, it's basically just a bunch of random characters in a certain character range. And the challenge is the SHA 256 hash of that base 64 URL encoded. So once we've generated our code verifier, we can generate the link that we're going to send the user to actually do the login. So we're going to send the user off to login.xero.com. We're asking for a code. We're giving them our client ID, which is this application's ID. Again, we've got the callback URI. We've got our scopes, which are space delimited URL encoded, hence the %20s between the scopes. Our state, our challenge, okay, which is the hash encoded, and the challenge method. So once we've done that, we send the user off to authorize the app. Let's move that up a bit. Okay, and this will 2FA as well. So once I've logged in, I can select the organization that I'm going to access. Most people will only have one and they won't get a choice, but because I've got the demo company created, I get two. And then I can allow access. Right, when that window's closed, I now have a temporary code here that's been given to me by Xero. And what I need to do is to exchange that for proper access token. So if I generate the exchange request, we can see here, we're trying to get an authorization code. There's our client ID again. The code from here, the callback URI again, and then we've got our code verifier, which is the random characters that we generated earlier on that matches the hash. Very simple process. Then we retrieve our tokens. So on the left here, we've got our OpenID token, and this, when decoded, will give me all the information about the user that's logged on. And we've got our access token, which, as we can see, was issued by Xero, and it's valid for 30 minutes. Now, I also had one of my scopes was offline access. And because of that scope, I've also got this refresh token down here, which is sort of like a temporary code, except that I don't need to re-verify. So I don't need to build this whole process again. So now we're down to the actual Xero stuff, and I need to get the tenants. So because Xero is multi-tenanted, I could send the user back through the authorization request part and get them to choose a second, third, fourth tenant, and that would list them in this box here. So we're basically all connected to Xero now. and we can just query the data, the API. I've just got a few examples here. So I can query contacts. So these are all the customers that are in the, well, actually contacts. This is customers and suppliers. I can go down a bit more in depth than that. If I copy that and go down to contact and put the contact ID in and set the endpoint. So this is just for that one contact, which drills down deeper into the process. I can also get a list of invoices. And if I scroll down here, I'll give you a demonstration, just find the appropriate place. Too far. Okay, so we've got this line items here. And we can see that line items is empty. But if I actually query the invoice ID, so I can set invoice and query just that single invoice. If I come down now, I will see that this invoice was for monthly electricity. So that actually gets the line items that are on the invoice. Another useful thing dealing specifically with Xero is that we have this Explorer. And I use this Explorer quite a lot. So if I want to, for instance, get invoices, but I want to get only accounts receivable invoices, so that gives me all the accounts receivable invoices, so no creditors invoices in there. But I also get this useful bit of information here, which is the query string. And in my application, I can paste that in here. So now I'm taking that query that I made from the API, and I can use that in my application to get the data I need.
And Wayne, up to the point, looking at your graphic on the left, up to the point where you get to Xero APIs, so the two boxes at the top, all of that is the same in terms of OAuth, no matter what you're accessing. If it uses OAuth, then you'd go through that same set of steps, and you could probably use the same code. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
I think if I go into, okay. So this is another site totally non-relevant to Xero. We can see here we got the same code verifier and challenge. We do the same things. We do the code request with the challenge. We authorize. We get the whole process is exactly the same until we get to the point where we're actually using the API. Okay, so now we wanted to have a look at some of the code. This is the authorization button where we send the user off to Xero to sign in and grant authorization. Basically, we have an authorize window, and I simply call it using the show modal method to get the result back. If we have a look in the authorize window, there's only one control, the HTML viewer. It's called authorizer. In our show modal method here, which is overloading the standard show modal or the super Windows show modal, we set the authorizer to the URL that we have sent. Move that over a bit, might be easier to see. So we set the URL, send that off, then we show the window modally. When the window's closed, we return the result. Result is just a string field in here. So basically, when the user, that's not where I want to be. When the user has authorized, the user's browser gets redirected. In this case, the HTML browser gets redirected back to our callback URI, which we can use to trap the end of the result. We save the URL in its entirety, and then call the method close window, which is just self.close. This works in the document complete event for Windows because we're using Chromium. But in non-Windows, we need to use the cancel load event because we just don't see this ever appear in the document complete event. So basically, again, we just save the URL to the result property, and then we have to call, do a timer call later to close the window, because if you close it here, it crashes the whole thing. So that's just a workaround to move the actual self.close to the next event loop. So once we've done that, come back with our result is now the URL, including the return URI. We do a couple of checks. In this section here, I simply pass the query string, put it into a dictionary, and then from there I can get my returned state and the code that was given to us. Things to note, got our generate code verifier here. Pretty standard stuff, uses crypto random bytes to select the length, and it's down here, this bit here. And then we just go through again, we generate our random bytes and build our random codes out of this list. Challenge, very simple again. We just create a the base 64 hash for it, the SHA-256 hash, and then we encode base 64 URL. And when I first started this process, I thought, oh, that'll be simple. We'll just encode base 64 and then encode URL. That doesn't work. So I did a search on the on Google and found this chunk of code that my fellow MVP Kim had dumped into the forum, which does it all for me. And basically what we can see here is that we base 64 encode it, and then we swap some characters out using replace, and we strip off the padding at the end. And that's base 64 encoded. Another thing that was useful that I found when I was looking at JSON Web Token, I found this neat little thing, again by my fellow MVP Kim, JSON Web Token NTC, which again was just dumped onto the forum. So when I did a search for that, and I can decode, and that's where I can get the identity server and the start time, the end time, and the whole drama. All right, so before we go and finish this, we have this refresh token. Now we can see here that it's valid from 8:08 AM, which is New Zealand time, obviously. If I use this refresh token, it simply goes and gets a new access token and starts the whole process again. So which brings me back to what I also needed to show you was all of these token exchanges are done with standard URL connections. And we just take the data that we get back and pass it as required.
So when a token expires, it automatically calls the URL?
No, when the token expires, we'll get a response back from Xero with a 401 HTTP status, and then we can call the URL, or we can put a timer on and call it, but it has to be done manually.
Okay.
Another thing that Xero implements is rate limiting. Now, obviously, we don't hit that here, but you also need to check for response statuses of 429 and delay any more processing until such time as you're allowed to access the API again. I do have a bunch of code that automates this whole process, but it's not ready for public consumption at this point. And in a month or so, I'll probably put that up as a second open source project. Yeah, I'll let you know when that happens.
Cool.
Okay, questions?
Yes, are there any questions about this process? Go ahead and type them into the Q&A section and I will ask them of Wayne. Maybe it was that clear. Of course, it may take them people a minute to type, so let's wait for that. So essentially, there's a lot of exchanging of tokens and decoding and encoding before you, which all probably, have you ever timed it, Wayne? How long is all that? It must go pretty darn fast, right?
It does. The slowest part is getting the user to sign in.
Right. So they sign in and you exchange all this, and then you've got a token that you basically can use anytime you call the API. And at some point, that token will expire. And when it does, your code just needs to be careful to be looking for you said it was a 404 or a 401?
401.
401, yeah.
Authorization error.
Okay, so Anthony is asking, so for the refresh token, how long does it persist or is valid? Who controls the life of the refresh token?
That's set by the API server or the identity server. In the case of Xero, I believe it's 30 hours.
Oh, wow. So a long time.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's only while the session's open, basically. You wouldn't store that on anywhere.
Right.
You'd need to store the whole process in order to reuse it.
Right. So if the user left the app connected, in 30 hours it would expire, and then your system would have to go, oh, it expired, and ask for a new one?
Yes. Yeah. If that happened, you would have to re-authenticate the user.
Okay. And Anthony's asking a second question. Is there a way to force a new login? Once the token is gone, app dies, do they have to re-log in? Is that correct? Or do you just need to get a...
Well, they would need to re-authenticate, which you'd basically just put them back through the beginning of the process again.
Okay, so that would be up to the developer to decide when to do that. I mean, because yes. I think he's saying, I think, Anthony, you're asking that separate from the issue of the token. So basically, if you wanted to, for security reasons, after a period of time, make them log in again, you could do that.
Yes. Yeah, you just put them back through the process.
Right. Just show that, just call that URL again to, call this one to log back in.
That's right, yes.
Okay. Oh, Anthony's full of questions today. Okay. He says, oh, okay, that wasn't a question. He's saying that's a perfect answer. Thanks, Wayne and Jeff. Okay, well, you're welcome, Anthony. Security is obviously a very important thing on the internet. I think we as developers, we think about it a lot, but the rest of the world sometimes, I think, doesn't realize that once you put something on the internet, you really have to be thinking quite a bit about security. And that's what all of this is. That's why it can feel really complicated, but the whole point of that is to is to prevent someone from, well, a good example is that the state code, his example code didn't do this, but he passes the state code in, and his code could say when it gets that back, if it's not a match, like that could be stored in a constant or something. If it's not a match, well, that means I think it's like a man in the middle attack or something, right? Where somebody got in
Correct.
between.
Yes, correct. Yeah. That does actually get returned. You can see the state up here.
Right.
I don't check it, but yes, it gets returned, and you can do that. Another thing you could use that state code for is if you had a web application running on an intranet, so it wouldn't have any public facing ports. You could use the session identifier in there, so that each user, when they log in and authorize their part, you'd be able to return that session identifier and therefore link the code, the access token, back to that session.
Right. So Rick Plummer is asking I think he's asking if there'll be a way to download this example app.
Yes.
Project.
Yes. This example app is what I'm going to be sharing on GitHub later today as an open source project.
Great. And Edwin is asking, is a token refreshed every time a user uses it to perform a request, or will a login expire after a certain amount of time regardless of their activity?
The token doesn't need, theoretically, you could use the refresh token every time you did a request on the API, but that would be frowned upon by Xero. Basically, once the time gets past this time here, the only way to continue to use that would be to use the refresh token to get a new one. And that refresh token is also optional. We have a look at our scopes here. This offline access scope is what we use to get that refresh token. So if you don't ask for that, you will only get access for 30 minutes before you need to send the user back through and reauthorize.
Okay. So the refresh token is just what you use to essentially revalidate and to be able to continue after 30 minutes. But does the refresh token itself change, or does it change each time?
Every time you do use the refresh token,
yeah, you get a new one.
Well.
Okay, for another 30 minutes. Okay. And obviously with your URL connections and stuff, that can all happen in the background without the user even knowing about it. So
yes, exactly. Yeah. The way I use it is I have a class called authorizer, basically, which takes care of the whole process, and then it sits there operating in a timer. And I just throw requests into a queue, an array of requests, and they get processed, and that's it. I use delegates to handle the response, so every request I can point at its own delegate method.
okay.
And that's the code I'll put up once I've got it to the point where I believe it's publicly consumable.
Okay, so we've got a question from Anthony. I'm working on an OAuth 2 against M365 for enterprise utility software my company works on, so lots of questions. Since M365 is OAuth 2, it should work basically the same way, he's asking.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. It would be the same process. Because again, if you look at the graphic, the top two boxes there, authorization request, authorization code, getting it plus the identifier, getting back the access token, that's going to all be identical on any OAuth 2 application, any API that supports that. It's the stuff it's the stuff when you get down to Xero APIs that's unique to Xero.
Correct. Yes.
And Edwin's asking, why is refreshing frowned upon? I'm assuming that's just because they don't want you making unnecessary requests.
Correct. Yep.
Just traffic.
It is just traffic. Yes.
Okay.
There's obviously an overhead in generating the access token each time, and if you've got millions of people doing it, and doing it every time they do a request, you're going to have problems supporting the traffic.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, are there any other questions? We'll give people a minute. Think. Here's one. Does WhatsApp on web support OAuth 2?
I have no idea. You'd have to look at it.
Yeah, me neither. I don't use WhatsApp, but I'm sure a quick web search will give you the answer to that one. All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, then Wayne, I really appreciate you taking the time to show us OAuth 2, how it works with an API. Oh, wait, hang on. A couple more questions. I need to scroll down a little bit. Will the link to GitHub be posted on the Xojo forum?
Yes. This webinar is being recorded. I'll give Dana the link for the source, and that'll be put on the comments for the YouTube video. Okay.
And Edwin's asking, so this webinar is about connecting via OAuth 2, but how about making it my service use OAuth 2? Oh, so people can log in. So yeah, now it sounds like Edwin's asking about the opposite side. If I wanted to write a service and make it, support OAuth 2, I think that'd be another webinar.
It will be another webinar. It is actually something I'm working on for another project. So I'm building the identity server and so forth.
Oh, great, great.
And so I will probably cover that in another webinar. I don't know if it'll be in a month's time. I'm having to move house at the end of this month, so I'm pretty tied up. But
okay,
but
well,
it will be at some stage in the future. I will probably do another webinar and go through that process. That
would be great. That'd be great. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I appreciate you attending, and thanks again to Wayne for showing us all this. It's been great, and be on the lookout for more webinars from us. That we'll keep bringing them to you. And thanks again, and thank you for supporting Xojo. Bye for now.
Bye.